Well, hello. Welcome, everyone. I'm Dylan Ryder from the Johnson County Library's Career and Finance Committee. We have the privilege to be joined by college and career planner Jason Anderson, who will be offering information on tax-free loan forgiveness for student loans. Some quick background about our presenter. Jason Anderson is a seasoned college consultant focused on affordability, student success, and financial common sense. Jason holds an extensive professional background, including roles as a higher ed instructor, entrepreneur, and professional college and career planning consultant. He is a certified public accountant in the state of Kansas, a certified financial planner, and holds 2 master's degrees in business and education. Well, feel free to participate in the discussion by using the chat to add your comments and questions. While the contents of this program will be recorded for future viewing, Jason will attempt to address your questions following the recorded portion of this presentation. Thank you all once again. Here's Jason.
Hey, thanks, Dylan. I appreciate it. And it's good to be back at Johnson County Library. I am a Johnson County resident, and I love all the programs that Johnson County Library puts together. Of course, I do a lot of workshops at the library. So if you keep an eye on the event schedule, I do quite a few workshops on the college planning side. I've also done several workshops on the student loan side because, as you might imagine, my firm GradMetrics works on both sides of that equation and certainly help people in both sides. Now, one thing that I want to talk about before I get going here is I do wear 2 hats in life. And one of those hats is as a faculty member in the School of Business at the University of Kansas. The other hat that I wear is the owner of GradMetrics. And KU likes for me to mention when I'm wearing which hat so that people aren't confused and think that I'm speaking on behalf of KU or what have you. So in this presentation, I'm wearing my GradMetrics hat. And so keep that in mind. That's the capacity in which I'm speaking to you. So let's talk about where we're going to go. We really can't talk about public service loan forgiveness, which is the core of this presentation, without talking about student loans in general and how we got here. So we'll start down that path with student loans. Then we will talk about public service loan forgiveness in depth. And in particular, we're going to talk about the original program. We're going to talk about the temporary and expanded public service program, public service loan forgiveness program. And then we're going to talk about the waiver, which is really to the core of what the title of this presentation is. The time to act is now, and that is the case with the waiver. And then we'll talk about other strategies. So if through this presentation, you're like, hey, I don't think public service loan forgiveness is going to be a good fit for me, we'll continue to talk about some of your other options. And you should exit this presentation with a good understanding of kind of all of the tools that you can use in order to manage your student loan debt. Okay, so student loans. Let's talk about student loans in the aggregate here, and then we'll drill down to some of the specifics as we go along. So the first reason why lots of student loan debt exists out there in the world is because the cost of college has skyrocketed over the last several decades. So if you could think, and this is a rhetorical question, you don't have to answer it or put anything in the chat, we're obviously being recorded, but what do you think is the average student loan payment for students exiting college right now? So that number is $393 a month. And this goes up regularly, as you might imagine. And I will say some of you all might be on this call and think $393 a month. I wish I had that student loan payment. Because if you go on to graduate school, if you're a parent borrower on behalf of a dependent student, if you go to professional school, like become a doctor, lawyer, dentist, you can amass significantly more than this $393 a month. And by the way, I feel your pain. I'm getting my doctoral degree in personal financial planning from K-State, and I have to take out loans as a part of that as well. So for those of us that go on beyond beyond the undergraduate level to the graduate level, we tend to take out quite a bit more than this, and your student loan payment tends to be a lot higher. Student loan debt, it's going through the roof. When I started college planning, I believe it was about 1.2 trillion. Now we're at 1.73 and it's always climbing. And by the way, I haven't been in college planning for decades. We're talking about 4 or 5 years here, maybe 6. And so this is a massive amount of debt that is coming at us from the student loan side. And by the way, to give perspective to this number, about a credit card debt in the United States is about $1 trillion. So significantly more than all the credit card debt in the United States, which is pretty astounding. There's also a pretty high default rate. This is one of the reasons why we don't see a lot of people out there doing refinancing of certain student loans, because it can be a risky debt class. And then we have the average student loan debt coming out at about $37,000, but again, can be significantly more depending on what type of education you're pursuing. It can also vary by the state that you're in. And this is kind of a common sense chart in some regards. So part of our cost of going to school in many instances also includes living expenses. And so if you find yourself pursuing your education on the coasts or in a metro area, you're likely going to spend a lot more and come out with a lot more debt because the cost of living is higher. By the way, in Kansas, we're a nice blue color. I like that. But our neighboring state, Missouri, not so much. And so again, can come out with more debt depending on where you're at in the United States. And again, I told you I'm in a doc program at K-State, so I get to pick on them a little bit. But again, I told you that the cost of college has really skyrocketed. And so if we even look at the undergraduate level, if we look at the full cost of attendance to go to a place at a place like K-State, and by the way, this is a state school. It's supposed to be affordable. It's supposed to be educating the masses in the state of Kansas. Well, unfortunately, that full cost, $27,185. So this is if you're going to school, living on campus, room and board, tuition, fees, personal expenses, transportation expenses, the whole kit and caboodle. And if we look at that over a 4-year timeline, which by the way, most students don't graduate on a 4-year timeline, with a 5% increase, we're looking at $117,000, which is incredible. It's something that has really gotten away from most families. And I can tell you, as someone who works in the college planning space, I have many, many conversations when the financial aid letter hits mailboxes, where families just don't understand this is the cost. This is the sticker price in today's dollars. And it really has kind of taken us unaware. So let's talk student loans. What type of student loans can you get? So you fill out the FAFSA. By the way, we're going to focus on what's called federal student loans in this presentation, especially since we're talking about public service loan forgiveness. So when we talk about federal student loans, we're talking about loans that are funded by the government. Whereas private student loans, we're looking at loans from a bank, credit union, maybe like a Sallie Mae, for instance, where we would see a lot of private debt originating from. Then we have different loan types. So you can have direct subsidized or direct unsubsidized loans. The difference between that being subsidized loans, so when the government is paying for the interest while you're in school. Unsubsidized loans don't have that, but you also don't have to have financial need to get those, which is a perk. Now, when we hear a lot of these horror stories of families coming out with hundreds of thousands of in debt, or professional students like lawyers, doctors, et cetera, coming out with a massive amount of debt, sometimes that's due to a Parent Plus loan. Because if you're an undergraduate student, a lot of times your ability to borrow is capped at a certain amount. It tends to be about $27,000 if you're going to school for 4 years, capped at about $31,000 over time. So you can't take out massive amounts like what we hear on the news. But if you're a parent or you're a graduate student and you're taking out a plus loan, really the equation changes significantly. You can take out basically all the way to the full cost of attendance. And so you can take out a lot of money, as you might imagine, if you're going to med school, for instance. So plus loans can be a problem. And frankly, like many of the clients that I work with are individuals who have taken out loans in this category and have taken on, hundreds of thousands in debt. So it happens pretty regularly. Now, if we look at interest rates, they are at historic lows, not the lowest. Actually, last summer or the last cycle, the last year was some of the lowest rates that we've ever seen. But right now, this is what you would borrow at. By the way, another thing about those plus loans that can be difficult for graduate or parent borrowers is there are higher fees. So you're at about 4% in terms of origination fees. You're also at a higher interest rate. So it's more expensive to go to graduate school. And so we have, not only is it more expensive from an interest rate perspective, but we also have people taking out more. And so that we can have compounding effects where people take out a lot more debt at higher interest rates and it gets away from them really quickly. So speaking of which, what's the light at the end of the tunnel? What we're here for, we're going to talk about public service loan forgiveness. So let's talk about the original program, because we're going to talk about public service loan forgiveness really in 3 different categories. The first is the original program, which is what we're going to talk about now. Then, if you've maybe heard in the news, the original program wasn't that great in terms of accepting people at the end of 120 qualifying payments. And so we've seen Congress and the Department of Education introduce new plans, temporary measures to help get more people approved under this program. So we're going to talk about what's called temporary and expanded public service loan forgiveness. And then we're going to finally talk about what you really need to know as you leave this presentation, the Waiver program, which is temporary through this October. Public service loan forgiveness a lot of times is talked about in terms of a 10-year forgiveness program. But I will tell you that is a little bit of a misnomer, okay? What you really have to get is 120 qualifying payments. Now, of course, if we divide that by 12, that we're going to get 10 years, right? But why I think it's more important to talk about it in terms of 120 qualifying payments is you don't have to make all these sequentially, right? You could work in a nonprofit or government, go to corporate, come back, get your 120 qualifying payments and get that forgiveness. So that's one, and sorry, I'm a little winded. I had to run up the stairs. That's number one, is 120 qualifying payments. Number two is that you work for the right employer. And by the way, we're going to talk about all these in detail. You have to not only work for the right employer, the right type of employer, but you have to work full time. Then you have a qualifying repayment plan. So you do have to be under a qualifying repayment plan. Not all of them qualify. And that's one of the main reasons why people lost out on the original program as it was written. We had a lot of people that were rejected. A lot of times they were rejected because they were in the wrong repayment plan. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Then finally, we have direct loans. Okay, so direct loans is the type of loan that you need. That continues to be the case even with the waiver program. So we'll continue to talk about that. Let me make sure I have all the slide stuff back here. Okay, there we go. All right, so qualifying employer. And actually, I saw a question come up in the chat. Hopefully this will answer that question as we go along. But a qualifying employer is either government. So this could be federal, state, local, or tribal. It's military is also included in that category. It's non-for-profit work, which most of you probably realize that one, that this is a program directly tailored towards government and nonprofit employees. Then we have a few kind of additional avenues that a lot of people aren't aware of. So the first is that it could be full-time AmeriCorps or Peace Corps volunteers. It could be qualifying public services, even if you're not technically a 501c3. And then you have to be full-time, which is 30 plus hours in most instances. But what's important is you need to know what full-time means for your employer. How do they define it? And HR could tell you that. So qualifying employer and full-time. And actually, again, this is another thing that hasn't changed. So even as we get into the waiver program, you're going to see that we haven't opened it up to the corporate world. It still is for government and nonprofit workers primarily. Now let's talk about the right repayment plan, okay? So we do have to be in a right repayment plan when it comes to the original public service loan forgiveness program. And so let's take a step back and talk about loan repayment plans for federal student loans. So the majority of people who are paying off federal student loans are in the standard plan. Why? Because that's the default plan. So if you don't do anything, if you exit your loan training at the end and you get through your grace period, you're going to be slotted into the 10-year standard repayment plan unless you tell the Department of Education or your servicer that you want something else. So most people don't take any action. They get slotted into this program. And what is this? Well, it's basically where we pay off our loans in 10 years. Pretty easy. Much like you would for a house or much like you would for a car, you're actually going to make payments on a timeline and you're going to pay it off. But a lot of people can't afford those standard payments. They can't afford to pay it off in 10 years. And so there are modified programs that have come about over time to help people afford their payments where they don't default. And so graduated is one of those. This is still considered like in the standard plan category, but it's where you're going to pay less at the beginning and more towards the end of the term. So you're still on 10 years, but the idea is that you pay less when you first get your degree because maybe you're going to get entry-level work. You're going to work your way up. You're going to be able to afford higher payments. And so as you get towards the end of that 10 years, you're going to pay more. By the way, anytime you modify the 10-year program, you're likely going to pay more in interest over time. So you got to keep that in mind. It's going to make, in most cases, it's going to make your loan more expensive because of the accrual of interest. Then you have extended, which, as the name implies, it's where you go beyond 10 years. So you're taking that 10-year term and you're extending it over time. Well, what happens when we extend over time? Your payments will go down, but again, interest is going to accrue. It's going to make your loan more expensive. Now, importantly, since we're talking about public service loan forgiveness, graduated and extended plans do not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. They're not qualifying plans. So if you find yourself in one of these payment plans, then you're not in a plan that's qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. Now, the waiver has changed that. We're going to get to the waiver. But still, long-term, as you work towards public service loan forgiveness, you need to be in a qualifying plan. And these two are not qualifying. Standard is technically qualifying, but guess what? You're going to pay it off in 10 years. And so this will bring you no benefit when it comes to public service loan forgiveness, because if you're paying it off in 10 years and public service loan forgiveness is a 10-year program, guess what? You get a balance of 0 forgiven, and that's not helpful. Now, what a lot of people do when they go into public service loan forgiveness is they slot into what's called an income-driven repayment plan. How are these different? Well, income-driven repayment plans are different because they're basing your payment on a percentage of income. So it tends to be 10 to 20% of your discretionary income, and that's what you're going to be paying towards your loans. So if you're in public service loan forgiveness, you're in public service, you're not making a ton of money. A lot of people will slot into one of these programs. They're paying way less than the standard payment because their income is low. Well, guess what? That means that there's likely a balance at the end of 10 years to forgive. And so these are, generally speaking, and in most cases, if not all cases, the type of repayment plan that you want to be in, so that you pay down less over time so that you get more forgiven at the end. By the way, and I'm not a tax advisor, this could change over time, but public service loan forgiveness is a tax-free, tax-free program. And so as a tax-free program, you're not gonna have to pay tax when you get that amount forgiven. So again, the fact that it balloons over time, although it may make you nervous, if you do get loan forgiveness at the end, that's tax-free and it's to your benefit to get more forgiven rather than less. So we do have different types of repayment plans. You probably heard of pay-as-you-earn or revised pay-as-you-earn. You've maybe heard of income-based repayment. There's an old and a new version of this plan. If you're a Parent Plus borrower and you've consolidated your loans, you've likely heard of income contingent repayment or ICR. And then very rare is ISR. I've actually never seen it in practice. So you can probably discount this. It's likely not going to apply to you. But what you should know, pay as you earn, revised pay as you earn, income-based repayment plan, old and new, an income contingent repayment plan, yes, even Parent Plus borrowers, these are qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. So these are qualifying plans. And then ISR, which I said is rare, again, is not qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. One of the main reasons because it's FFEL loans. Remember, I told you that you have to have direct loans to get public service loan forgiveness. And so that's one of the main reasons why you wouldn't be in this plan. So income-driven repayment plans, if you're in one of these, you're going to be in a good place in terms of qualifying plan for public service loan forgiveness. And then I just mentioned you need the right types of loans. If we go back to that list of requirements that I've covered, you do need direct loans. If you have FFEL loans or you have Perkins loans, or maybe even older loans that aren't on this list that are not direct loans, those aren't qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. So you do need the right type of loan. And how we get around this, or I went to the next slide too quickly, how we get around this, so to speak, is you consolidate. But one thing though, that I would tell you is don't just go and consolidate all your loans on a whim, okay? Let's say you have direct loans and you're making progress towards public service loan forgiveness. If you, for convenience sake, for instance, consolidate all your loans together, you could erase some of your progress towards public service loan forgiveness. That would be a great tragedy. So just know what you're doing before you consolidate. The waiver program, a piece of it is encouraging people to consolidate, but consolidation is not always good in all situations, okay? So just talk with somebody that knows what they're doing, or do your research before you consolidate. Make sure you know that it's not going to penalize you. And then you have to make qualifying payments. So you have to make 120 qualifying payments. So these are defined under the original program as full payments made after when the program came into existence. You're required to make the payment, as in you can't make qualifying payments during like a grace period or forbearance or deferment. You have to be under the right repayment plan and under the right employment. We've talked about that. And guess what? They can't be late payments. So by the way, some of this has changed under the waiver program. So that's a good thing as well. So the first thing that Congress tried to do when the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was not going well is introduce this program called the Temporary and Expanded Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, also known as TEPSLF. I know, lots of acronyms when it comes to public service. But what was this designed to do? Well, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in its original form didn't work very well, okay? So what they did is they introduced this, and it was designed to catch people who were not in a qualifying repayment. Because again, I told you, like if you went 10 years paying in the graduated repayment plan, it's not a qualifying plan. So you can't get loan forgiveness. That's a huge shock to you if you thought you were on the path to public service loan forgiveness, and lo and behold, you were in the wrong plan that whole time. So it was designed to catch people. They were in situations like that. But still, you have to have direct loans. And basically how the Department of Education or your servicer would see whether you qualify, you'd fill out the same public service loan forgiveness paperwork, which we're going to talk about that later in this slide deck. And then your servicer would look to your eligibility for both programs. So it's good. It's good that we have this program. It casts a wider net for people to get public service loan forgiveness, but still didn't solve all the problems. And so when the Biden administration came along, we really wondered in the industry, in the student loan industry, so to speak, that we wondered, hey, what's Biden going to do to increase public service loan forgiveness, to maybe introduce new repayment plans, to maybe forgive debt, and we'll talk about that too. And what ended up happening, maybe to a lot of people's surprise, was a modification and an improvement of the public service loan forgiveness program. But guess what? It's temporary. So to the title of this presentation, if you're going for public service loan forgiveness, you need to take action this year, essentially, to make sure that you qualify under the new waiver program. So the waiver program was announced October 6, 2021. It goes through October 31st of this year. You can learn about it. And by the way, just so that nobody thinks I'm plagiarizing, much of this PowerPoint presentation is directly from the guidance that I've linked throughout this PowerPoint slide deck. I'm essentially taking these announcements that the Department of Education has put out for you, and I've made them throughout this PowerPoint in a more accessible way. I've put them in a more accessible format. But I would very much encourage you to look at these links, to look at these announcements, to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, because essentially all I'm doing is I'm presenting what the Department of Education has already announced on the website. So just keep that in mind. This isn't original content. I'm just essentially being a mouthpiece for the Department of Education right now, not on their behalf, but you get what I'm saying, that I'm just presenting this information to you that's already out there on the website. So in a nutshell, we're going to look at several summaries. What is the waiver program? Well, this is from the Department of Education. This is a direct quote. They say, you can receive credit for past payments made on loans that would otherwise not qualify. So the waiver program is really looking back at payments that didn't qualify, and they're reassessing whether they're now qualifying payments under the waiver program. So that's really what it's about. And then it says, as a summary again, under the new rules, any prior payment will be made will count as a qualifying payment, regardless of loan type. Remember, we talked about direct loans, regardless of repayment plan. Remember, we talked about the right repayment plan, whether the payment was made full or on time. We talked about the need to be full and on time. So you can see I've set you up in terms of like what the old program was, and now what the waiver program has waived for you for this temporary time to get more qualifying payments towards your 120 qualifying. And it even says at the end of this quote, All you need is qualifying employment, which is incredible, right? Because we talked about all those requirements. Now all we need is that qualifying employment piece. Now, at the beginning of that announcement that I just linked, it gives you a summary of the different changes. And so again, great guidance coming from the Department of Education that can guide you through each scenario that you might find yourself in. And we're going to look at those here in a second. But it's essentially saying for a limited time, you can receive credit for past payments. This is a retrospective program. If you have loans that don't qualify, that aren't direct, if you have FFEL or Perkins or other student loans, you will need to consolidate. So we'll talk about that. So you can get credit, but you need to consolidate within this waiver window. And then it says past periods of repayment will now count regardless of whether you made a payment, if that payment was made on time, the full amount due, et cetera. Whether you were in a qualifying repayment plan, again, they're waiving basically everything else. And then it says periods of deferment, forbearance, periods of default continue to not qualify. So if you found yourself in default, you're not going to get the benefits of this program. The qualifying employment, again, hasn't changed. So you still need to work for a nonprofit, government, tribal, military, all those different options that we talked about earlier. So the first thing that you might be asking yourself is, do I need to consolidate? Because I mentioned that, hey, you can get some really negative consequences from consolidation if you don't know what you're doing. So if you have FFEL loans, if you have Perkins loans, if you have other loans that aren't direct loans, yes, you need to consolidate by October 31st, 2022. If you want to qualify for public service loan forgiveness under the waiver program. And again, lots of perks here. So a lot of people, if they find themselves in these situations and they have qualifying employment, they will need to consolidate by the deadline. So let's talk about different scenarios. Again, we've talked about all the different iterations of the public service loan forgiveness program, but now you're saying, hey, Jason, help me through what this might look like for me in a practical way. So again, I'm going to be kind of the mouthpiece of the Department of Education. They outlined some scenarios on the website when they announced this and said, hey, if you find yourself in scenario A, B, or C, this is what you should do. So let's go through those scenarios. The first scenario is if you're already on the public service loan forgiveness path, okay? So in this case, you've already submitted your paperwork towards public service loan forgiveness and you have direct loans. So if you find yourself in that situation, guess what? One of the coolest things about this program is you could get automatic credit for those past payments that didn't previously qualify. The Department of Education and the servicer going back through those old payments, and they're going to give you automatic credit. And there's even some crazy stuff that can happen here. Not only could you get public service loan forgiveness, like just wake up one day and all of a sudden your loans are forgiven if you're in this scenario, but you could get refunded for payments that you made beyond 120, which is incredible. So can you imagine if you got public service loan forgiveness and got refunded a bunch of payments beyond 120? That'd be a good day, right? And so this can happen. And I'm assuming, I can't point to any specific situations, but I'm assuming it has happened. And so we're seeing automatic forgiveness start to occur because the servicer, if you've already filled out your paperwork and you have direct loans, they're already going back and crediting automatically what qualifies under the waiver program. And let's say maybe you have you've submitted public service loan forgiveness paperwork for one employer, but maybe not another one, like you switch nonprofits, you have other paperwork that you need to kind of get current with in terms of public service loan forgiveness. You need to do that by the deadline. Okay, by the deadline of the waiver program, submit that paperwork, make sure that you're in compliance on time for the waiver program. Okay, so that's the first one. That's the easiest route. You've already kind of submitted your paperwork and you're just waiting for the automatic credit. Scenario two is you want to start down the public service loan forgiveness path. So this is if you have direct loans, qualifying loans, but you've never submitted public service loan forgiveness paperwork. And so what do you need to do in this scenario? Well, you need to go and verify that you do indeed have direct loans. You can do this on your student loan dashboard, your student aid dashboard. Then you need to fill out public service loan forgiveness paperwork, which we're going to talk about that. And you need to do it by the deadline to gain benefits of the waiver program. And then if you're not already assigned, you may already be assigned to Fed Loan Servicing, but Fed Loan Servicing is the servicer that works on public service loan forgiveness. So filling out public service loan forgiveness paperwork may reassign you to Fed Loan Servicing if you're not already there. So that's another thing that might happen if you're in this scenario. But verify you have the right loans, fill out the paperwork, right? Still pretty easy. That's if you're in scenario two. So scenario three that might feel a little bit scarier is if you're on that consolidation path. So this is for those individuals who have, again, qualifying employment. That is a common theme here. But you have Perkins, FFEL loans. You log into your dashboard and you have some kind of weird non-direct loan. In those scenarios, then yes, you need to consolidate into a direct loan by the deadline to qualify for the waiver program. And then you need to submit public service loan forgiveness paperwork. So those are the two things that you need to do. If you find yourself in scenario 3, you're wanting to do public service loan forgiveness, you're for the right employer, but you just have the wrong loans. This is what you need to do in scenario 3. So really, this should be all encompassing. You're either going to fall in scenario 1, 2, or 3. You need to know which one you fall under, and that will outline the action you need to take. And again, I haven't made up these steps. These steps are outlined for you under the waiver program rules on the Department of Education's website. And they were, honestly, I thought it was great that they pulled out these 3 scenarios. It makes it very clear as to what your path forward is here. So another great summary, just to end us out here on the waiver program. What is the waiver program all about? Well, under the normal public service loan forgiveness requirements, we talked about those. You need direct loans, you need to be on the right repayment plan, you make on-time payments, all these things we talked about, right? Now, the changes though, you can receive credit now for loans that don't qualify. Again, we need to consolidate, but you can receive credit for them, which is pretty incredible. On any repayment plan counts, even ones that don't qualify. Periods of repayment on loans before consolidation account, even when in the wrong repayment plans. There's all sorts of things are waived under the waiver program. We've talked about many of these, but this is, again, a temporary program. That's why you need to act now, depending on which scenario you're in, 1, 2, or 3, which we covered. So it's important. Okay, so we've talked about public service loan forgiveness paperwork, and you're like, Jason, what is that? Okay, I want to make a distinction here. So many of you all are likely in an income-driven repayment plan. So you are likely filling out paperwork to certify your income, right? Because we talked about income-driven repayment plans. You have to, it's based on a percentage of your income. So every year you're telling your servicer what your income is so they can calculate that payment, right? And that is not optional, okay? and actually, if you don't submit that paperwork, you're going to be penalized. Essentially, they're going to strip you out of that plan. They're going to put you in something called an alternative plan, which is not fun. So you are required and must fill out that income-driven repayment plan paperwork in order to stay current and in good standing in that plan. Now, I bring that up first because that's required, not optional. Public service loan forgiveness paperwork is optional along the path, okay? So the Department of Education and people in my shoes would tell you best practice is to submit this paperwork regularly, okay? So, and the Department of Education would say do it annually. But you definitely, one of the good things about submitting public service loan forgiveness paperwork before the 120 qualifying payments is you'll actually see in your dashboard what your qualifying payments are. So you'll kind of be able to keep track of it. You'll also have peace of mind that your employer is a qualifying employer, that you're actually making progress. So a lot of people, again, the Department of Education, myself would say, hey, fill out that paperwork regularly. And if nothing else, if you switch employers, like you go from one nonprofit to government work or nonprofit to another nonprofit, you go into military, you need to submit that paperwork just to make sure that your next employer is qualified, right? So fill out the public service loan forgiveness paperwork regularly. That's best practice, but you don't have to. You could wait till the end of the program, submit at the end of 120 qualified payments, as long as you're still working for a nonprofit. You could get public service loan forgiveness at the end. It's just kind of I guess not best practice to do it that way because you're waiting till the very end to see if you've actually made progress. And of course, a lot of people did that under the original program, got to the end, realized that they didn't qualify. So that's not the place that you want to be in. And the PSLF help tool is a really great resource here, not only for the paperwork, but just to guide you through some of this. Here's what it looks like on the Department of Education's website. You can get there at studentaid.gov/PSLF. So other strategies. Okay, so we've talked about public service loan forgiveness. By the way, I want to keep an eye on my time. It looks like we've gone longer, but of course I had some issues. So I'll get through the end of this fairly quickly, but there are other forgiveness opportunities. Public service loan forgiveness is not the only loan forgiveness program out there for federal loans. If you're a teacher, there are teacher loan forgiveness opportunities. There's also great opportunities if you're in healthcare fields. If you're a doctor, there's a number of different programs out there for forgiveness for specific professions, but teachers are certainly one of them. Medical professionals certainly another. There's also borrower's defense. So if you found yourself in a situation where maybe you were defrauded by a for-profit college, your school closed on you while you were going to school, maybe the people who gave you loans did something that was, not right. In those situations, sometimes you're able to get forgiveness for that, and it's called borrower's defense or closed school or false certification. You can also get some discharges through bankruptcy, which is very rare, by the way. Really, actually, student loans are one of the exceptions to bankruptcy, but there are some situations where you can get it forgiven in that way. Then there's death and disability discharges. By the way, Parent Plus borrowers should know, like, their discharges as well. Like if you borrowed on behalf of a student and they pass away. And then I would encourage you to look at state opportunities. So whatever state you're in, go to that state's Department of Higher Education, whatever that is. So like here in Kansas, it's Kansas Board of Regents. Also, a lot of other government entities have incentive programs to help pay off loans where we have high need for employers or specific types of professions. So I'll give you just one example here in Kansas. We have a rural incentive program in Kansas where if you go and live and work in a rural county, you could get parts of your loans forgiven. And I believe it's currently $16,000 or $17,000. So there are all sorts of little kind of smaller and niche programs at the state level. Another thing I would say is there, of course, are student loan initiatives right now that can help you with your loan payments. And so if you have federal student loans right now, you likely know that there's 0% interest and there's no payments right now. One of the cool things about public service loan forgiveness and also income-driven repayment plan forgiveness is that your payments that you're not making during this period still qualify for public service loan forgiveness. They also qualify towards income-driven repayment plan forgiveness, which is something I forgot to mention. But if you're in an income-driven repayment plan, one of the other benefits is that they have forgiveness after a certain period, typically 20 or 25 years. So even if you didn't qualify for public service loan forgiveness or you decided to go work for the corporate sector, if you still have a balance after the end of the term of your income-driven repayment plan, you can have your loans forgiven. But one of the things about this, and when I talk about the taxable implications here, again, I'm not a tax advisor, which is the disclaimer down here, but this forgiveness, long-term income-driven repayment plan forgiveness, at least after 2025, is taxable. So if you got $250,000 forgiven from an long-term income-driven repayment plan forgiveness, that'll be added to your income for that year, and you have to pay taxes on it. So we call this the tax bomb in the industry, and you have to plan for it. You have to plan and prepare for it. Another question that I get is Biden administration. Is he going to blanket forgive a bunch of loans? Possible, but actually he's told us he won't forgive $50,000 in a previous town hall. So I would imagine, again, being brief here, but it will be lower in amount and limited in scope if it happens at all. I don't have a crystal ball, but I wouldn't depend on this as your light at the end of the tunnel. It may happen limited and in scope and lower in amount, but if it doesn't happen at all, I certainly wouldn't be surprised. Other student loan issues, if you have private student loans, there are strategies to pay that down. The debt snowball, the debt avalanche are two ways. You can also refinance, but again, be careful before you refinance and consolidate. You could lose out on federal benefits if you have federal student loans. Another thing that I would say is a lot of employers are starting to offer the benefit of paying down your student loans as a part of working for them. Okay, additional resources. We talked about Fed loan servicing a lot. Here's their number, but you might be in a number of other servicers. For instance, I think my loans are at Nelnet. And so here are their numbers. Also, the Department of Education has a hotline you can call. It's 1-800-4-FED-AID. This is the same for the FAFSA, by the way, but you can ask student loan questions. Also, the best website, studentaid.gov. I've mentioned it several times throughout this presentation. You can also check out blogs at my website, gradmetrics.com. I do I do write blogs and also podcast about all sort, podcasting, whatever the verb is there. I certainly do a lot of that when it comes to student loans and college planning topics. So check out the Grad Centric podcast. I've been doing that for 40 or so episodes now. And then finally, you have my contact information. So I know this is pretty complex. It's a little bit scary. And so if you have questions, you need additional guidance, you can always email me or call or text the number that you see on your screen, 816-601-2002. And I'm happy to help in the ways that I can. Also, I haven't posted it yet, but I will PDF this slide deck and I'll post it at gradmetrics.com/workshops. So if you want a PDF of the slide deck, it'll be there here in about 15 minutes after we end this call. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dylan as we field some questions.
Awesome. I will say I'm really impatient. So if you could get that slide deck up, we've got people clamoring for it. You know, you don't want these pitchforks being broken out on you. Okay.
That's right.
So, thank you all for joining us this evening, and everyone, please take a quick moment to drop a thank you in the chat for Jason taking the time to share this information regarding this extremely beneficial program, and something that I maybe could have benefited from had I known about it a few years back. Whoops. Anyway, I saw, just a quick note. I saw all of your questions. I've taken note of them. And also, if we get to the end of the Q&A and you feel like your question still hasn't been answered, just mention that in the chat, and we'll try to get that taken care of. So
yeah, and
everybody,
Dylan,
go ahead.
I would say too that since I had to jump off because of my my tornado drill, I only have the ones that were posted since I rejoined, and so I'll probably let you field the calls or field the questions and I can answer.
Yeah, no problem. So everybody, please stick around for just a quick a few moments while I tidy up a few other things. I want to tell you all about our next career in finance program. That's going to be centered around wills and powers of attorney. That program will take place Thursday, April 21st at 6:30 p.m. and will feature Alexandra English, who is the managing attorney and director of the Elder Rights Project for Kansas Legal Services, a fantastic organization. If you have any relatives or you yourself are interested in this topic, you don't want to miss this program. Again, that will be Thursday, April 21st, 6:30 p.m. If you're interested in viewing more programs related to career and finance, we have recordings available in several locations. The easiest place, youtube.com/Joco Library, which if you are watching the recorded version of this program, chances are you already know about. But you also may not be aware of the Library on Demand Hub, which can be found via the events menu at jocolibrary.org. While you're on the library site, feel free to check out the research menu to find additional career and finance related resources. Sign up for our monthly career and finance e-newsletter, all that jazz. Also be sure to follow the library's Facebook page. It's facebook.com/JocoLibrary to receive notifications for additional live online Johnson County Library programming for all ages.